Hello and welcome to Community Forum. My name is Wayne Pomiansky and I'll be hosting today's program. Our guest is Senator Brian Joyce. Senator Joyce has appeared on the program periodically and keeps us up to date on what's happening in the Massachusetts legislature and sometimes on some of the national political trends that are emerging, so perhaps we'll have a chance to discuss some of them. For those who maybe are not familiar with the senator's background, let me give you a little bit of updated bio information on Senator Joyce. He is serving his 8th term in the Massachusetts Senate, representing the Norfolk, Bristol, and Plymouth district, which includes Avon, Braintree, Canton, East Bridgewater, Easton, Milton, Randolph, Sharon, Stoughton, and West Bridgewater. Hopefully I haven't left out any of the cities or towns that are in your area of responsibility. Senator Joyce is the Senate Chair of the Committee on Bonding, Capital Expenditures, and State Assets. He is Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Healthcare Financing and the Joint Committee on Financial Services. 1984 graduate of Boston College School of Management and a magna cum laude graduate of Suffolk University Law School, where he was an editor of the Law Review. Senator Joyce is a practicing attorney who has taught both at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Brian and his wife Mary have 5 children between the ages of 12 and 22. They live in Milton, Massachusetts, and a little extra factoid that one of their nearby neighbors is Governor Deval Patrick. So Brian, again, thanks for joining us on what is a very, very busy time. I know the legislature is coming very, very close to the end of its session, which I think will be, by the time our program runs, adjourned. You're extremely busy, so thanks for joining us today.
Sure, my pleasure. I've actually been on so frequently now that I thought I might get royalties, so I'm wondering about that.
Well, you know, we'll have to take that under consideration, okay. Right? I understand, and we're going to be talking about the economy. That's in everybody's mind, and there's been so much activity in D.C. these days with the debt ceiling and deficits and so on and so forth. But let's focus at least initially on Massachusetts. You were recently in China for a couple of weeks, and just curious, maybe you can fill us in on what the focus of that trip was and how that affects Massachusetts.
Sure, I was invited to be part of a trade mission along with the governor of Montana, the Senate President of Alaska, and the chairs of appropriations for Wyoming and Hawaii. And we just spent 2 weeks in China. It was an extraordinary visit, Wayne. I was there once before, about 7.5, almost 8 years ago. And I think during those 8 years, there was the equivalent of perhaps 40 years or 50 years in change in China. It was an extraordinarily eye-opening experience.
Wow. So again, representing or looking for opportunities to link Massachusetts with the burgeoning economy of China and hopefully see some benefits that would translate over here.
Yes, and you know, and by the way, because we have a lot of cynics in politics, there were no tax dollars or campaign dollars used on that trip.
Really?
It was, but in any event, candidly, it was a little bit disconcerting in the sense that their economy, let me tell you a little story. 7 or 8 years ago when I was in China, then I mentioned, come back just a couple of weeks ago. We fly into a terminal at Beijing Airport that didn't exist 7 or 8 years ago, and that terminal itself is I think bigger than Logan
Wow.
International Airport. Get off the plane and have to take a train within that terminal to get your luggage. Get the luggage, and I get in a car, and we drive down a new 10-lane highway in the center of Beijing that didn't exist 10 years ago. 5 lanes in each side. Get to the hotel, all state-of-the-art, extraordinary, modern facilities, and took a train from one of 3 brand new train stations within the city of Beijing. Each of those train stations, again, dwarfs our South Station and get on this train that goes 200 plus miles an hour, sitting in the lap of luxury in a very comfortable leather chair with a person serving tea to the riders. And I go to a city called Tianjin that 25 years ago was marshland. Now there's 7 million people and growing quickly. They experienced about 20% economic growth last year during an economic downturn. And it was interesting because the person who was addressing us, I'm not sure he recognized his audience, was elected officials. And as Tip O'Neill said, we're concerned about jobs, jobs, and jobs. I want the jobs here. And I think he thought he was addressing some American business executives, but he made the pitch for moving our manufacturing or our jobs to China. And for a lot of Americans and a lot of people perhaps watching this show who may be out of work or underemployed, I felt like I was in the epicenter of where the jobs have gone. It's essentially like the industrial park for China. And it was an extraordinarily effective presentation. Basically that they could do it better, faster, cheaper. And I had my cell phone with me, my iPhone. You know, Apple is one of the successful American companies right now. And I looked to see what was going on back at home. And on the state level, we were debating a bill to ensure transgender equality. Now, I'm very much for equality, but here was an issue that impacts 0.00001% of our population. I looked to see what was going on in Washington. Washington was essentially paralyzed by this Anthony Weiner nonsense.
Yeah.
And so it was just a very discouraging moment for me that, in China, it appeared that they were focused singularly on growing their economy, from which all other things really derive. I mean, we need to have a strong economy to do all the other things that we want to do to improve our quality of life and standard of living here in the U.S. And yet we were focused on really what I saw as tangential matters. So I think that one of my takeaways was returning home with an even more strong resolution to focus on really what matters to the people in my district and people in Massachusetts, I think, and that is economic matters,
Absolutely.
jobs.
Yeah.
But it was an extraordinary visit. We traveled throughout the country. There's some suggestion that the governor from Montana may be a candidate for president, so we were given very high level access and treated. But just the growth. I mean, when I went to Shanghai, for example, I think when I was there 8 years ago, 10 years ago, the population, my memory, it was around 16 million. We met with the mayor who handed a piece of paper that indicated the population was 20 million, and an aide corrected him and said, no, we're now at 24 million.
Wow.
Just the level of growth.
Extraordinary.
And you'll see 50, 60, 70, 100, 150 buildings, say the size of our Harbor Towers in Boston, big apartment buildings being thrown up, knowing that these people are coming from the country into the city, and just that level of growth and that labor force that they have. I mean, essentially China's the same size as the US with 1 billion more people. It was an extraordinary visit. We were down in Guangxi province near Vietnam, and we traveled really throughout the country, and I do think there was some serious benefits, I hope, that translate into my effectiveness as a state senator that I derive from that trip.
It's interesting that you should mention the presentation that Chinese official was making about the rationale for moving jobs to China. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, as I was driving in this morning, listening to the news, there was a report that Boston Scientific, which has been one of our leading high technology companies, announced that they were planning to build a plant in China, which will employ, I can't recall whether it was 1,000 people or maybe it was 2,000 folks. But I know that Boston Scientific is one of the companies that received tax incentives in exchange for a promise to increase its employment in Massachusetts. And I think they also announced that they were going to spend several $million repurchasing some of their common stock. So my question is, you know, if the Commonwealth has given them an incentive in the form of tax breaks, which is, of course, something that's being debated in Washington right now, should they be building a plant in China, or
Well,
should they be investing here?
It's an excellent question, and this is a very real and very current debate. First, I give actually extraordinarily high marks to Governor Patrick and his administration for their willingness to seek to improve and their focus on trying to improve our economy. You know, none of us feel that the economy is doing as well as it ought to. The statistics show that we are, in fact, improving, that unemployment nationally is down, and in Massachusetts, we're significantly better than the national average, and we are adding jobs, but just not at the rate that we want to see. It's a sluggish recovery. I think I mentioned this to you once before, Wayne. The CEO of Amazon, I forget the fellow's name,
Jeff Bezos,
something like that. He had a great quote that I saw one time where he talked about the great fear among business leaders and political leaders to take a chance for fear of criticism. One of the things I give credit to Deval Patrick for in his administration, they have taken some measured chances, and most have paid off. Some have not. The great failure was that Evergreen Technologies out at Fort Devens, where the jobs didn't materialize, and the company is essentially bankrupt now. Their stock's down to about 30 cents. One of the great successes is right here in my district, Organogenesis, we've mentioned in Canton, where we've made some targeted incentives that have resulted in that company's workforce almost tripling. Average wage now over $80,000. So we've taken some chances, but they are measured chances. For the most part, when an incentive is given to a company, it's a quid pro quo. We'll give you this, you create jobs. There are what we call clawback provisions, so that if those jobs are not created, then that incentive either is not provided or must be paid back. So I don't know the particulars yet of the Boston Scientific. I am part of a group within the Senate that wants total transparency, that wants all of these incentives, everything wholly transparent, so every taxpayer can see exactly what is going on with their hard-earned money. But I'll give you a couple of very real and very recent examples of how I'm working with the administration on small businesses in my district. There's a company in Randolph. Years ago, there was a company called Zeppi's that made bagels and was a kind of a landmark. They went out of business 6 or 7 years ago. A fellow moved in to this bakery space, and there's some manufacturing space, and created a company called All Can Eat Bakery. It is a company that focuses on food products that are available to people with food allergies. There's a real growing market now, a niche market, but a real rapidly growing market of children and even adults who have developed food allergies. And so they need, say, gluten-free products. They need other things. And it has to be created in a bakery where there's no cross-contamination. This fellow has created this business where children come in and for the first time in their lives can eat pizza. Just some kind of human heartwarming stories. They can eat foods they never could before, and he's making a great product. He's got two problems, frankly. Needs to have some more professional management and needs access to capital.
Yeah.
As a startup business, needs access to capital. Just signed on with Whole Foods, has some real potential. Years ago, there was a company in Randolph called Stacy Pita Chips that grew, and then PepsiCo bought it over. This has the same potential, I think, but really is on the verge of not making it because of a lack of capital. I brought in an entity called the Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, something we started last year under an economic development bill that I spoke with you about last year. And we've brought in some management expertise, and we're also going to give them some access to the capital that they otherwise would not have. And
To expand, but
to
by
expand.
more
So we're going to
equipment.
take a chance on this business,
Yep.
but we think it's a measured chance that's going to help create jobs in Randolph, in my district, in the state. A company also actually happens to be in Randolph called Pura Vida, trying to do away with these bottles in creating water dispensing machines throughout the state and throughout the country. Kind of a neat idea. Rather than having Coca-Cola machines, we would have water dispensing machines. People would carry their own canteens, essentially, and we're helping that business grow and succeed. I have a business here in Stoughton, Mass Bay Technologies, a couple of brothers who live in Stoughton who, they're involved in some pretty high-tech manufacturing. Computer component parts that, if I were more computer savvy, I could articulate exactly what. But here in Stoughton, manufacturing high-end electronics equipment to compete with China and Japan and other nations. And I brought out folks from the Mass Office of Business Development, helped them get on the federal procurement list. We're helping them get on it so that they can compete for defense contracts, and also giving them some exposure here in Massachusetts, and we're helping to nurture this small business. So we on the state level are taking chances on businesses in Massachusetts, but we think they're measured chances. There have been, admittedly, some failures. The administration, I think, flopped on Evergreen, and I don't know all the details on this Boston Scientific expansion in China, but the reality is we do need to grow our Massachusetts businesses, create jobs. Now, some folks say, and there's some truth to this, the investment ought to be not on providing those companies breaks, but in providing better training and education for the workforce. And that's a debate that's currently going on. So my answer is we need to redouble our effort. And again, coming back from China and seeing the focus on the economy there while we're fiddling and diddling with tangential issues, we need to get back and focus on what's important, jobs.
Speaking of jobs and education and the need to have a qualified workforce, and I think a lot of us have heard numerous times how there really are lots of jobs that are open in the U.S., but they can't get filled because we don't have candidates for the jobs with adequate training. And again, it sort of links back to China and India, that on a per capita basis are graduating many more technically qualified, technically skilled employment candidates than we are. What's happening here in Massachusetts in terms of education to try to ratchet up the qualifications of the workforce?
Well, it's a real strength of our economy, actually. It's one of the reasons that we have created, I think, per capita more jobs than any other state. And I think we've created more overall jobs than any state but one. It's because of the strength of our workforce, our better educated workforce. We have a higher percentage of citizens in Massachusetts with a college degree than any other state in the union. Our public schools rank among the best in the nation for 4th grade, 8th grade, and in high school measurements for math, science, and English. We're among the very best. Still, clearly not as good as we need to be, but we are either first or tied for first or second in any one of those categories among the 50 states. And that's because we started this investment in our public schools back in 1993. And I can't take credit for that. That was before my tenure. But we started that investment before other states did nationally under the No Child Left Behind Act. But we have also our extraordinarily great universities. We have over 100 universities in the greater Boston area. And from those universities, the high-profile ones are MIT and Harvard, but there are many other great schools that generate and incubate many of these jobs in this knowledge-based global economy in which we're competing. Interesting point is, are we then taking steps to keep those jobs in Massachusetts? Facebook was discovered or started here in Massachusetts, and it's in California now. That has the very real possibility of being among the 5 largest market cap companies in the world in just a few years. Something that a kid started out of his dorm in Harvard just 7 or 8 years ago. So are we doing what we can to keep those jobs, to incubate and grow those jobs in Massachusetts? Google, a lot of that work was actually started here in Cambridge, and yet those companies don't remain here. So we're looking at that as well. I do agree with your premise that it starts with education and training. We have frankly had a lot of tug and pull with whether we want to expand the charter schools at the primary school level and free some of these schools from the restraints inherent in the public schools and their rules and unions and the like, and that's an ongoing debate. So we've seen a growth in our charter schools. But the public schools and charter schools alike, the performance is improving, not as fast as we'd like to see, still better than other states, but again, we're not competing just with Missouri or Michigan anymore. We're competing with Bangladesh and Thailand as well. So your point is well taken. It's really a question of how do we allocate our resources, a question of values, a question of priorities. And so there's a very good case that can be made for a whole host of social programs, a whole host of, say, infrastructure improvements, roads and bridges and trains and the like. There's arguments that can be made for significant investments in a lot of areas of government spending with a finite ability to make those investments. And in fact, in recent years, less monies, fewer dollars coming in as a result of a declining economy. It's been a pretty challenging couple of years, Wayne.
I wonder, another item that I heard in the news today, which is starting to impact Massachusetts, and it always perks up my ears because I'm a former software recruiter, and this particular story was that the high-tech Silicon Valley economy in California is so robust now that California companies are pretty heavily recruiting our high-tech employees out of Massachusetts to go to San Jose and San Francisco. And I'm just wondering whether it makes sense for us to, as a state, try to recruit based on all of the advantages we have, not the least of which is a somewhat less expensive high technology workforce, software engineers, systems engineers, and so forth, as compared to what the salary rates are in California. Should we maybe be trying to entice these companies to open satellites here?
But what I want to point out is the inherent conflict with your first question, which had to do with should we be making these investments in these companies, and look what happened, this company is actually bailing on us. So shouldn't we just let the market, free market forces work? With this question, which suggests should we make an investment in these high-tech companies so that they are able to afford or attract this much-needed talent. And so I think your questions really very appropriately expose the inherent conflict or the
Sure.
the policy arguments that we're undergoing right now. It is true that there is a very real shortage of particularly software engineers. So, I have a person in my office, her son's going off to college. He said, boy, what do you think he ought to focus on? And I laid out the 5 things, we're short on. I said, healthcare is booming, life sciences, software engineers, there's certain areas, and yet
Right.
we're still creating, hundreds of thousands of new lawyers. We have enough lawyers,
We do.
but
We do.
we don't have enough software engineers. And because of that shortage, they're in demand right now. Part of us would think that the market will sort itself out, that folks will focus their studies on where the jobs are, but there is a role for government to play in education and training.
Absolutely.
And perhaps retooling some of our community colleges, for example, to focus on particular areas of need.
Well,
And we do have, by the way, we do have things like workforce training grants.
Yes, we do.
For existing companies.
and in
such.
fact, Microsoft is here in Massachusetts, Google is here. A lot of the high-tech companies that exist in core stages on the West Coast do have satellites here, but I just hate to see some of the folks that maybe we've trained that have graduated from, UMass or UMass Lowell, MIT and so forth, Boston University, on and on and on, leaving Massachusetts, the brain drain kind of image.
Well, and it's
going off.
interesting because a higher percentage of those students that attend the public universities, UMass, Amherst, UMass Lowell, here Bridgewater State, a greater majority of those graduates do stay here in Massachusetts and contribute to our local economy. UMass Lowell, for example, has a program that has been pretty well funded, focusing on something called nanotechnology. UMass Amherst has some particular areas of expertise. We have a lot of research going on now out at UMass Medical Center in Worcester.
I was going to mention the medical center, great medical school.
And so more and more of those graduates do in fact stay here and contribute to our local economy than the graduates from our great private universities. So that weighs into our equation as we think about investing more money in these public universities. I mean, Wayne, I have 3 children in college right now, and the tuitions are absolutely killing us. I mean, just absolutely killing us. And we have to recognize for Massachusetts families that there is a role for government to play to help educate these children so that they compete and contribute as tax-paying citizens upon graduation.
Well, we definitely have to do what we can to make sure that they've got the credentials that they're going to need to qualify for these jobs. Let's shift our focus a little bit to the budget. I understand that we do have an FY12 budget that's pretty much signed, sealed, and delivered. We see an awful lot going on in Washington right now. Maybe by the time our program airs, this debt ceiling controversy will be resolved, at least in the short term. Tell us about the budget. Do you see an impact in terms of less federal dollars flowing into Massachusetts?
Well, the state budget, and we're talking 2 different things now, state and federal. The state budget, the fiscal year 12 budget was passed. So fiscal year 2012 began on July 1st, 2011, and it was a balanced, fiscally prudent budget. We have a balanced budget requirement in Massachusetts. It's embedded in our Constitution. So on the state level, we simply are not able to spend money that we don't have, unless there's some bonding, some long-term debt that comes through my committee, actually.
Right.
But our operational budget every year has to balance, and indeed it did. In fact, we have a slight surplus in revenues now. We had more tax dollars come in than had been anticipated as the economy does improve somewhat. So cities and towns that were already expecting an increase in Chapter 70 funding for the schools, an increase in funding for the roads and bridges under Chapter 90, but we're expecting an overall decrease in general aid, now are not going to see any decrease in general aid because revenue has grown somewhat. We're going to send it all back to the cities and towns. But the budget, interestingly, we end up spending less in fiscal year 12 than in fiscal year 11. I mean, it's rare indeed to see government spending less from a year than it had previously. And that's a reflection of having fewer dollars, less revenue. The economy has been slow, we all know, for several years. So fewer people working meant fewer income tax dollars. The stock market wasn't doing as well. It meant fewer capital gains tax dollars. People weren't purchasing as many goods, meant fewer sales tax dollars. And so we had to make adjustments. Part of the adjustments were offset by a couple of things. We had socked away more money than any other state in the union in a rainy day fund, so we were somewhat prepared. And second, we had terrific support from the federal government through the economic stimulus dollars that were sent back to the cities and towns. Those federal dollars have gone away now, and with the discussion now about reducing the debt in Washington, we anticipate still fewer dollars coming back to the state. So we are going to clearly have to make do with fewer federal dollars. No question. No question.
So does that play out through the say, FY13, FY14 budget?
Absolutely. I expect that this budget we passed was among the most challenging because, again, you'll have constituencies of folks that have, frail and homebound elders or have children with disabilities or have a keen interest in investing in our schools or ensuring adequate police and fire protection or roads and bridges and the like. And at the same time, we have a fiduciary obligation to make do with the dollars we have and also be mindful of having still fewer in the years going forward, at least fewer federal dollars, to sock away some of that money in that rainy day fund. I think we did a pretty good job this year in balancing things, but it's clearly a challenge. And a couple of things have happened. One, it clearly has forced some efficiencies on government. And before people fall out of their chairs suggesting that there are some efficiencies in government,
right.
One of the areas that was really killing us was healthcare. Healthcare costs were rising exponentially. The state, through its group insurance commission, has done a pretty good job in trying to control those costs, both the cost to public state employees and the cost of the bigger part is moderate to low income families that are taking their insurance through the state. We've controlled those costs fairly well. Cities and towns were doing a little bit less well in controlling those costs that were just starting to swallow the cities and towns' ability to do anything else. Healthcare costs for municipal employees was growing just extraordinarily by leaps and bounds. And so we did pass in this budget measures to control local healthcare costs. And there was a lot of objection from union members and from public employees. Nevertheless, I think it was done in the public's best interest, in the taxpayers' best interest, and ultimately in those workers' best interest, because at some point there'd be no ability to pay them. The healthcare costs were growing so rapidly. So we were forced, I think, by this bad economy to wring out some efficiencies. Certainly there's more to be wrung out. There was no appetite whatsoever to raise taxes. So the only thing we could do was cut, and cut we did. Now I think the challenge facing us is, do we have an appetite to invest further in our really crumbling infrastructure? A lot of our roads and bridges, our train system, the Big Dig is already in need of further repairs. We have, very serious infrastructure, primarily in the area of transportation challenges before us. And so that's another public policy debate. There's been a little hint of looking at the gas tax. I don't know. I don't think the votes are there. I don't think the public appetite is there to look at raising taxes at this point. So we look to other possible sources of revenue. I'm quite confident that we're going to have the casino question before us again, perhaps in September. And I think the likelihood is that we will see casinos in Massachusetts, passed this year. And again, in an effort to capture more revenue to address these very real needs we have on the spending side.
Do you, I guess it looked like we were going to move in the direction of casinos in the session last year. Are the issues that basically prevented that from happening, racinos and so number of casinos, have they been resolved? Have there been discussions that hopefully have moved away some of the objections to casinos? Are we pretty much where we were in the previous discussion period?
Well, I happen to sit on the committee that's hearing this legislation and called Economic Development and Emerging Technologies. I do believe that we're going to report out a bill that does address some of the issues that held things up last term. I think the governor had a very serious point where if we were to award these casinos just to the racetracks, it would essentially be a no-bid contract, that these 3 or 4 racetracks would be awarded casinos without or racinos without having to competitively bid. Is that getting the best dollar for the Massachusetts taxpayer? So his point, I think, is well taken. But on the other hand, we have, just here in proximity to my district, Taunton Rainham Park, it's already set up. It has the infrastructure. They could be in business in very short order, bringing some revenue into the state. So that's the ongoing debate. I think we're going to work it out, and we'll work it out in the next 2 months.
I certainly hope so. I can tell you just anecdotally, as I travel down Interstate 395 to visit my daughter and my grandson and her husband in Connecticut, there are quite a few buses that typically are passing me, speeding along on their way to Mohegan Sun. And I got to believe that, a lot of the passengers in those buses are Bay Staters. Right. And that we could certainly harvest some of that revenue if we can at least move maybe not a giant step 3 casinos, but one to sort of proof of concept and see how it goes, and then maybe expand from there.
Right. And on the other hand, I do think it is okay that we've proceeded slowly, yes, because once we open this door, we're never closing it again. Right. I'm always mindful of the fact that when we have gambling in Massachusetts now.
We do.
We have the state lottery, and it started as a single number drawing back in the 70s. Now it's expanded into daily number, megabucks, Keno, right, scratch tickets,
Powerball.
It just goes on and on and on. And so I think the same thing would happen with casino gambling and racetrack, slots and the like. So I think proceeding cautiously and trying to get it right makes sense. But it does mean jobs. It does mean revenue. You're correct. We're losing money to Connecticut and to New York and to Rhode Island. I think would be the 40th state to have casinos. So it's not like we're going to be one of the few. So these dollars are going elsewhere. I'm actually not a huge gambling fan, but I recognize the merit of keeping the dollars here rather than sending them elsewhere, and also the jobs inherent in a destination casino. Yes. First, the construction jobs to build the facility, and also the attendant jobs that remain there with hotels and folks that work there and the like.
And I think, we do recognize that there are social issues, social problems that are linked to gambling in general, mm-hmm, but obviously the population has decided in its wisdom that it likes to gamble. Correct. It generates revenue and jobs, as you say. Perhaps it's, we're overdue getting on the casino bandwagon.
Well, stay tuned.
We'll see. You mentioned infrastructure and the big dig. It sounds, Senator Joyce, like there are still some serious issues involving water intrusion into the tunnels. I'm sure you went through the Ted Williams Tunnel on your way to Logan Airport. I did recently on a trip to Europe. And some of the Globe Spotlight team reports indicating that there's a lot of water that's still coming in there, corroding various structural members. Yet it seems like we're not saying it's much of a problem. In your role in the Senate, do you have any concerns about that?
And I sit on the Transportation Committee. Of course I have concerns about it. We've made this now $19 billion, $20 billion, whether it was federal dollars or state dollars, this extraordinary investment in the big dig, which most folks think will actually, in the long run, turn out to be a prudent investment, believe it or not, even though the price tag was huge, way higher than we had anticipated, because it's created now this extraordinarily valuable real estate in Boston that in itself generates revenue, tax dollars, business for years to come. If you've been down to the Seaport District, mm-hmm, if you haven't been there, go there. It's extraordinary. We just had a little surprise birthday party there for my wife, and just incredible, incredibly. Really. And so I don't know that we opened up the access to much of Boston by taking down the overhead line and creating the big dig. But there are problems. There are problems. Now, the good news is I think that the current transportation secretary has been in the news, Jeff Moans, among the most competent folks I've ever worked with. He happens to be a friend and a neighbor as well. An extraordinarily competent individual. He's the third transportation secretary just for this administration, probably the seventh or eighth or ninth that I've been exposed to in my tenure, maybe even more. They don't seem to have a long life cycle. He has extraordinary responsibilities as we've merged a lot of the transportation agencies. I think that he is doing an extraordinarily good job, and we are openly and transparently exposing what shortcomings there are. What he is suggesting, however, and his point is well taken, nobody wants to talk about this kind of elephant in the room, and the elephant in the room is that we have about $20 billion in unmet infrastructure investment needs and no public appetite to support that investment. And it's a hard situation to be in. We clearly have to address the leaks in the Big Dig and ensure that that salt water is not corroding the any part. Yes. Right. So, but we also, we're talking about expanding a South Coast rail through this district down to Fall River, New Bedford. How do we make that investment before we repair our existing infrastructure? So it's a very serious policy debate. And at the same time, address the other things you talked about, education and the like.
All of those things. There is, I know one of the things I noticed on my most recent trip to Logan in June, there had been a series of really serious, mostly motorcycle accidents in the Big Dig tunnels due to, I guess, the fencing along the corridors where maintenance folks work. And I thought that all of that fencing was going to be removed as a safety issue, yet it doesn't appear that has happened. And is that something you're aware of in your role in the Transportation Committee?
Honestly, it's not.
Yeah.
Honestly,
okay.
I'm not aware of that fencing. I've had 2 trips to Logan in the last couple of weeks. I just came back from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for a baseball tournament for my youngest. In the introduction, you have old material. Said I have children 12 to 22. Now it's 13 to 22, and he's almost 14.
Wow.
And his little baseball team was New England champs.
No kidding.
And
really?
We went down to South Carolina to play in a national tournament.
Terrific. So, a little different in South Carolina than it is here in Massachusetts.
I'll tell you, I was in a city, it was in Myrtle Beach, and it was, sometimes we're critical here in Massachusetts of the difficulty in developing and the planning board and the zoning board and how difficult it is to get everything approved. If you want to see the other extreme, you go to Myrtle Beach where it seems like they just plop anything everywhere. I mean, it's just this mishmash. Wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I did enjoy spending the time with my son. And
a lot less snow there in the winter, that's for sure. We were talking also about fiscal issues, and I know one of the topics that we have discussed in previous programs was pension reform. I understand, Wall Street up until very recently and the debt ceiling debate has pretty much recovered from the 2008, 2009 meltdown. My understanding is that the reserves that support our still underfunded pension program had something like a 20 or 21% gain for the current fiscal year, so that the balance has been restored almost to what it was prior to the 2008-2009 meltdown. Given the better condition of the reserve account, does that mean we don't have to bother with any further pension reform?
No, absolutely not. You're correct. The return on the state pension fund, I think it was actually a little higher than 22%. I think it was more 24 to 26. I mean,
really,
it's an extraordinary return. It's a reflection of the stock market bouncing back. So that we're almost to the levels we were at in 2008 before the big downturn. We did engage in very serious pension reform about a year ago. I was involved in that. And we curbed much of the egregious abuses and folks that were gaming the system. We really did curb virtually all of those abuses. Now, folks will create other ideas and try other gimmicks, but people that were serving in local office for a few years for
Part-time and
$300 a year, and then they join the state system and get credit for all those years. That stuff's gone. But so there's no more gaming the system for the most part. We did engage in very serious pension reform, but we have another step, and I think that's coming. I'm sure that's coming over the next 6 months or so. There are further reforms we have to make. Now, a couple of important points. One is that the average public pensioner in Massachusetts receives a pension of $26,000 and is not eligible for Social Security. So the average public retiree is not gaming the system and is not getting unduly wealthy. And in fact, for the current public employees, most of us are contributing virtually all that we will receive at the back end. We're almost fully funding our pensions. The problem is primarily with those folks that worked years ago that did not have to contribute, not their fault, but just the way the rules were, didn't have to contribute toward their pensions. Or if they did, they had to contribute a very small amount. So we had this debt that we were kicking, the can down the road, and eventually it came to roost. We had to, deal with it, and deal with it we are. We have further reforms, and I'm certain we're going to address them. We also are addressing the issue of those retiree health care benefits, another exploding debt that has been kicked, further down the road, but we're finally tackling it. So I'm delighted the stock market returns have improved, but it doesn't obviate the need for further reform.
Excellent. Thanks for that clarification. We have about 15 minutes remaining. Another hot topic is redistricting. We're going to lose a congressional seat in the next Congress. We've had the census, of course, so we have updated information on our population trends. What is happening with redistricting?
So what happens is every 10 years, the United States Census data comes out, as you suggest, and pursuant to the Constitution, we have to reapportion districts so as to ensure equal representation. Through the last 50, 60 years, we've seen a great migration to the Sun Belt states, really, since they had I think since the invention of air conditioning. Right. People have been moving to warmer climates.
That's true.
And so we've lost seats in Massachusetts, and we're going to lose another one as a result of the most recent census data. We're going to go from 10 congressmen down to 9. And so there's obviously very political jockeying to see how those districts are going to be revised. But in addition to that, Wayne, we also have to change the state Senate seats, the governor's council seats, the state representative seats, and there's a lot of jockeying and concern there as well. You mentioned the towns that I represent currently. I may not represent all of those towns when we come back in January, or actually, I'm sorry, back it would be in 2013 that those changes would be effective. So there's quite a bit happening, and I think that there is a strong push among the minority community to ensure adequate minority representation. I think that the process has been wide open, has been very transparent, and I think the result will be defensible. I think we have a very competent person on the Senate side, and Senator Stan Rosenberg driving the bus on that.
Is there a particular deadline date where redistricting needs to be presented to the legislature, or when does it
I think we'll
end?
see a plan. I think we'll see a plan unveiled in September would be my guess.
Okay.
And a vote on it by the end of the year.
Okay. And in terms of the legislative session, probably will adjourn I guess July 31st.
We actually have a 2-year session. So we really won't adjourn until July of next year, of 2012. Here we will not have formal sessions during the month of August. That's it. So the work continues. I'll still be going to work every day, but we don't have formal sessions during the month of August, so that to accommodate folks' schedules.
Okay, very good. Let's take a couple of minutes. We usually have some announcements toward the end of our program. We have about 10 minutes to go. First of all, if folks need to get in touch with Senator Joyce, there is his contact information, State House Room 109D in Boston, 02133. Phone number is 617-722-1643 or 781-821-9494. Crew would like to thank Maxie's Delicatessen. Maxie's. They always come through for us, ladies and gentlemen, with great eats preceding our program, and usually there's at least a bagel or two that's left over when we're through taping, and we make sure that we don't waste anything. Maxie's is located at 117 Sharon Street in Stoughton. Phone number there is 781-341-1662. The American Cancer Society is looking for volunteers to drive cancer patients to and from treatments. Contact number is 1-800-ACS-6662. On the web, www.cancer.org. Also in the volunteer space, Ilsa Mark's Food Pantry and St. Anthony's Free Market, First United Methodist Church. If you can help out with those programs, the contact is Ann Havlin. You can reach Ann at 781-341-0611 or 781-341-0549. Another terrific volunteer organization, of course, is Meals on Wheels, always seeking volunteers to help out with their programs. Jessica is the contact. You can reach her at 781-344-8882, extension 2. Community Forum showtimes in Stoughton, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. We are on at 6 p.m., Monday at 8 p.m., Tuesday at 5 p.m., Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 28. Comments and suggestions always welcome. You can reach us at communityforum1@yahoo.com. In Easton, we are on the air on Mondays at 7 p.m., Wednesday at 1 p.m., Saturday at 3:30 p.m., Sunday at 10, Comcast Channel 9, Verizon Channel 22. And again, our contact on the web is communityforum1@yahoo.com. So we have a little time remaining.
Let me tell you, I thought this was a 1/2 hour show. I don't know how I thought that because I've been here
right several times
yeah.
Actually, and no, we cover a lot of stuff, and
Sure
I think you're always an excellent guest with lots of information, and we get straight answers. I appreciate that, Brian.
Well, I'm pretty much just making them up, right?
Right. Yeah. If you don't know,
sure.
Make it up, and hopefully that no one will catch us, right? You mentioned you've got five children. I know you have your law practice. I recall from the last program, I think your son was graduating from Harvard this year.
Well, he decided to be on the 4.5-year plan, so I'm delighted to suggest they still have another semester of tuition.
Right, another big check to write out.
Right. I have 5 children, which means I have extras if you'd like some.
Sure.
Tuition.
Right. Oh, how well I know. I just drove my grandson down to Rutgers a couple of weeks ago for orientation down there. He lives in Connecticut, so he's an out-of-state student attending a state college, and I think the full boat there, room, board, required fees, about $35,000 a year. So it ain't cheap, that's for sure. But you got to do it, really.
And there's a very real concern, actually, with this whole generation of kids getting out of school burdened by extraordinary debt.
Yeah.
Children coming out, particularly now out of graduate school, with a mountain of debt from undergraduate and graduate, and the first $1,000 of after-tax dollars they make upon graduation for the first 15 years of their professional life has to go paying off bills. Mary and I worked very hard to try to limit the amount of bills that children have, and it's not easy.
No, it's tough. And of course, I guess one of the phenomena that gets mentioned is that a lot of the graduating students, of course, have difficulty in this economy finding jobs, and very often because of the debt situation they're in, really find themselves more or less compelled to try to work in some areas that maybe are not really what they like to do. I'm thinking, someone that wanted to be a teacher who now feels like, gee, they've got $90,000 of indebtedness. They need to find a job on Wall Street or in some industry that maybe for financial reasons they're compelled to go after, even though we need them as educators, perhaps, is the example that keeps cropping up. We've only got about 5 more minutes to cover a lot of topics. Anything else that we've missed on your end at the State House? Is it really more about the ongoing fiscal restraint?
Sure. Well, let me just tell you, today we're taking up a bill to probably change the way alimony is paid in Massachusetts. I think we're the only state that has lifetime alimony, and there's a movement now to stop alimony payments in both instances age 65. That's separate and apart from property division and separate and apart from child support. Tomorrow, I expect we'll be taking up court reform, a time for me to work out the differences between the House and the Senate. And there's some very real opportunities to improve the management and efficiency with which we run our courts. And I think it's incumbent upon the legislature to recognize that the judiciary is a co-branch of government. We have executive, legislative, and judicial. And I think we're pushing the Senate to give the judiciary management authority to use its resources where these days. There's a lot of attention between the House and the Senate on that. So we have changes going on in alimony. We have changes going on in the court system. As I said, we'll be taking casino. I think next, probably by September, will be my guess. We will be pressing for pension reform. We will.
I guess expansion of the bottle bills.
Expansion of the bottle bill, yeah. However, some of the bottles have been things that have developed really since the original bottle was passed. Yeah, full agenda, just barely scratch the surface,
Right, a lot. And then, of course, 2012 national elections. We will know. Obviously, redistricting will be completed. We'll know what's happening in the Congress, and you, of course, are a leading Democrat in the state. There's chatter already about who could be a candidate to maybe contest Scott Brown's position. And a friend from the Senate, obviously.
Yeah. And I honestly think a strong Democrat could beat him, but I'm waiting to see the field develop a little further on the Democratic side. He will be a very, very formidable opponent based on an extraordinary war chest. He's a popular individual. I think the way the Democrats should go after him is on some of the votes, the economic votes. I mean, there is a record of support, I think, for some tax breaks. You talk about tax breaks to corporations. On the federal level, we've offered some tax breaks to companies that outsource jobs to foreign nations and then keep their profits offshore and don't pay taxes and really kind of hurt the local worker, hurt the local economy. So we'll see if that debate develops. But it's certainly going to be an interesting year in presidential campaign. We have a U.S. Senate seat open.
Right.
And so
we'll hold it there, Brian. Thanks very much for being a guest, and we'll look forward to another update in a future show.
Sure. Pleasure.